"If I can't have him," Ngala declared, pounding her chest with her fist, "then no one will." She turned to the girls standing behind her, their faces pale with fear. "Not a single word of this must reach the village," she ordered. "If anyone talks, you all are as good as dead." Once upon a time, in a village called Ako, a place so beautiful that flowers bloomed everywhere and birds sang sweet songs every morning, there lived a king named Emenike. King Emenike was not just any king. He was one of the richest men anyone had ever known. But even with all his wealth, he was known most for his big, warm heart. He was married to a queen named Asa, who was not only beautiful but also had a kind smile that could light up even the darkest of days. Together they ruled over Aku with so much love and care that their people felt like they were living in the safest, happiest place on earth. King Emenike and Queen Asa were blessed with a son named Obora. Obora was a handsome young boy who looked just like his father. Some people in the village even said he was his father's twin. But it wasn't just his looks that made people love him. Obora had a heart as big as his father's, full of kindness and love for everyone around him. Every day, he would walk around the village greeting everyone he met with a big bright smile and a warm hello. He always took time to talk to the old people, play with the little children, and helped anyone who needed it. The villagers felt so lucky to have someone like Obora, who was the happiest prince they had ever met. King Emenike was incredibly proud of his son. Every time he saw Obora helping someone or heard the villagers praising him, his heart swelled with joy. He often thought to himself, "We have raised our son well." He was sure that one day, when Obora became king, the village of Aku would become even more wonderful and the people would always be happy. King Emenike felt blessed to have such a son, and he believed that his kingdom's future was bright and full of hope. According to tradition of the land, young Prince Obora was betrothed to marry a maiden from the village, and this maiden was named Ngala. Ngala was a daughter of Chief Ikuku, one of the most important men in the village. In fact, Ikuku was one of the king's cabinet members. From the moment Ngala was born, the king and queen laid their eyes on her tiny face, and a warm smile spread across their faces. They felt something special in their hearts and knew right then that she was the chosen one for their son. Ngala was such a very beautiful baby. As she grew older, her beauty blossomed like a flower in the spring. Her long dark hair shone like the feathers of a raven, and her eyes sparkled like stars in the night sky. People would stop and stare whenever she walked by, unable to help but admire her glowing skin and graceful movements. She looked like the bright morning sun, and everyone thought she would make a perfect princess. The king and queen felt pleased with themselves, certain that their son would be grateful for the beautiful bride they had chosen for him when he eventually grew up. But as time went on, it became clear that there was more to Ngala than her beauty. Her parents, Chief Ikuku and his wife, had failed in their responsibility. They had not raised her to be humble and kind. Instead, Ngala grew up thinking she was better than everyone else. She became so full of herself that she acted like she was already the queen, even though she was just a maiden in the village. She looked down on everyone and strutted around with her nose in the air as if no one else mattered. Whenever she walked through the village, in her beautiful long flowing gowns, feeling like a princess, with high shoulders, no one dared to call her by her name or even stand up straight as she passed. Everyone was afraid of her because she had no respect for anyone, not the young, not the old. She treated people like they were trash just because she was betrothed to the prince. And she had beautiful dresses that was always gifted to her by the royal house. She was always surrounded by other young maidens who followed her everywhere, waiting for her to dish out instructions and acting as her maid. But they didn't follow her out of love or friendship. They followed her because they were scared of her. She would force them to do whatever she wanted, and they had to keep her secrets. Ngala had a bad temper and was known to be a bully, always making others feel small and afraid. People in the village whispered among themselves, worried about what might happen if she ever became queen. They saw how different she was from Prince Obora, who was loved for his kindness and humble heart. Ngala was the exact opposite, and the villagers could only hope that something would change before it was too late. Prince Obora loved Ngala so much. She was beautiful and all, but her character was a big no for him. He always heard stories of how she would go about treating people like they didn't matter, and this really hurt him so much. And sometimes he would share his concern with his parents, who were so in love with Ngala that they never saw anything wrong in what she does. To them, she was this sweet daughter they never had. One warm afternoon, Prince Obora decided it was time to have a serious talk with his betrothed Ngala. He had always believed that kindness and respect were the most important virtues anyone could have, especially a future queen. He hoped that if he spoke to her gently and honestly, she might understand and change her ways. He knew deep in his heart that if they were to rule the kingdom together one day, this change was very important. To make the conversation special, Prince Obora decided to prepare a delicious lunch for the two of them. He knew that Ngala loved fish, so he carefully cooked a rich, flavorful fish soup, using all the best ingredients he could find. He arranged for them to dine in the royal garden, a beautiful place filled with blooming flowers and tall leafy trees that provided cool shade. The garden was peaceful, and he hoped it would help set the right mood. As they sat down to eat, Ngala's face lit up with happiness. She was pleased that the prince had gone to such trouble just for her. "This is so delicious," she exclaimed as she took a sip of the soup. "How did you learn to cook this well?" Prince Obora smiled and replied, "My mother is an excellent cook, and I learned by watching her in the kitchen." Ngala laughed, a joyful sound that made the prince's heart feel light. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a soft glow on her face, making her look even more beautiful. Obora couldn't help but feel mesmerized by her smile and the way her eyes sparkled in the light. They continued eating and chatting happily, their laughter filling the garden. Prince Obora waited patiently, enjoying their light-hearted conversation, but also thinking carefully about what he needed to say. After they had finished their meal, they sat back under the shade of a large tree. The prince felt that the time was right. The atmosphere was light and Ngala seemed to be in a good mood. He took a deep breath and decided to speak from his heart. "My love," he began softly. "I care for you deeply, but there is something that bothers me." Ngala looked up, noticing the serious expression on his face. Her smile faded a little as she asked, "What is it, my prince?" Prince Obora gently took her hands in his. "When I become king, you will be my queen. But a queen must have the qualities of a great leader. Kindness and humility are so important to me. But I feel like you do not show these virtues. I need you to work on these things if we are going to rule together." Ngala's face tightened with surprise and a hint of anger. "What do you mean, my prince? Are you saying you will end our relationship?" No, Obora quickly replied, his voice rising a bit. "I don't want to end it. But you will force me if you do not change. I love you, Ngala, but I also love my people. I cannot have the person who is meant to protect them become their oppressor." At these words, Ngala's temper fled. "How dare you say that to me? Your people do not respect me or see me as their queen," she snapped, her voice sharp with anger. Obora stayed calm, though he felt a storm brewing inside. "That's because you are not their queen. At least not yet," he said firmly. "Listen, Ngala, you must learn to treat others with kindness and stop turning them into your punching bags. Respect is not something you can demand. It's something you earn through your actions. It comes naturally when people love and hold you in high esteem." Ngala's face grew red with fury. How dare the prince speak to her this way, she thought. She stood up quickly, her eyes blazing with anger. "I won't stay here and let you insult me," she shouted. "If the villagers don't respect me, maybe you should teach them to do so first." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the garden, her footstep heavy with anger, leaving Prince Obora sitting alone, wondering if his words had made any difference at all. Prince Obora knew deep in his heart at that moment that Ngala was not the kind of woman he could ever have by his side as a queen. He had watched her storm away from him, angry and proud, and he felt a deep disappointment settle in his chest. He thought about his own mother, Queen Asa, and how he had never seen her walk out on his father in anger or refuse to listen. Ngala had shown no respect, not just for the villagers but also for him. How could someone be so full of herself that she wouldn't even accept any advice or correction? His mother had always told him that Ngala might change as she grew older, but Obora wasn't sure anymore. He feared that Ngala would never change. No matter how much time passed, his heart felt heavy because he knew his parents would never see things from his own point of view. But one thing was clear to him: he could never marry a woman with such a character. Since the day of their arguments, he and Ngala hadn't spoken a word to each other. Ngala had come to the palace several times, hoping to see him, but the prince refused to speak to her. Oh, the first time she came, he had thought she was there to apologize, so he waited, thinking she might show some regret or humility for her actions. But instead, she just chattered on about other things, completely ignoring what had happened between them. Prince Obora felt his heart sink with disappointment. Unable to hold back his frustration, he had quietly stood up and walked away, leaving her alone in the palace garden. From that day, Whenever she came to the palace, he refused to see her. Meanwhile, the new Yam Festival was fast approaching, and the whole village was buzzing with excitement. This was the most exciting time of the year, and everyone was preparing for it. The New Yam Festival was always a grand event. Many people from different kingdoms were invited, and the celebration was full of colors, music, and dance. The young maidens of the village were especially excited. They would dress up in their most beautiful and colorful clothes, adorn themselves with beads, and practice their dances to entertain the guests. It was a chance to show off their beauty, grace, and talent. The market was busier than ever, with maidens flocking in groups, buying new clothes and special items to beautify themselves. This was more than just a festival to them. It was an opportunity to find a good husband. Many young men from distant villages and even the city would come back home to find a wife during this season. The maidens knew that if they danced well and looked beautiful, they might catch the eyes of a good man. Their mothers would often tell them stories of how they had met their own husband during the New Yam festivals, and the young maidens dreamed of finding their own true love in the same way. Ngala, who had been unable to speak to Prince Obora since their argument, saw this festival as her perfect chance to win him back. She decided that if she danced beautifully, he would not be able to take his eyes off her. She practiced her dance steps with determination, making sure every movement was perfect. She spent a lot of money on the finest clothes and the most beautiful beads, planning to adorn herself like a queen. Ngala knew she was beautiful, and she believed that if the prince saw her in all her splendor, he would be unable to resist her. In her mind, she pictured him coming to her, falling to his knees and begging for her forgiveness for ignoring her all these days. The thought of this made her smile, and she felt confident that the festival would bring them back together. 7 days before the festival, the village would come alive with the excitement of the masquerades. The masquerades were a special part of the celebration, and everyone looked forward to their parade. As soon as the villagers heard the loud rhythmic sound of the gong echoing through the air, they knew the masquerades were coming out. The gong was always followed by the beating of drums, and this drum beat was unlike any other. It was so lively and powerful that it could make even the saddest person want to dance. The villagers loved this special sound because they only heard it once a year, just before the festival, and they waited eagerly for it every time. On this particular day, Nene was under the Obora tree, gathering ripe fruits that had fallen to the ground. She needed to sell these fruits at the market to get enough money to buy the rest of her dance costume. She had been working hard all day, her hands moving quickly as she filled her basket with the small round fruits. Then she heard the drum beat. The sound was like a magic, a sweet melody that seemed to reach deep into her heart and soul. Before she even realized what she was doing, she had dropped the basket and started dancing. Her feet moved on their own, her waist wriggled to the rhythm, and she spun around with joy. From every corner of the village, people could hear the beat of the drum loud and clear, calling everyone to dance. Nene loved dancing more than anything else in the world. To her, dancing was like food for her soul. That was why she had been working so hard, picking fruits and doing odd jobs, just to earn enough money to buy her costume so she could join the other maidens in the village dance. As she danced under the tree, she forgot everything around her. Her movements were so graceful and full of life. For a moment, she looked like the goddess of dance herself. Her feet moved in perfect time with the drums. Her arms flowed like water, and her smile was brighter than the sun. At that very moment, Prince Obora was returning from the stream, riding on his horse. As he approached the village, he saw something that made him stop in his tracks. There, under the Udara tree, was a young maiden dancing with such beauty and grace that he felt his heart skip a beat. His jaw dropped and he stared, unable to look away. For a moment, he thought he was watching a goddess dance. He had always believed that Ngala was the most beautiful girl in the kingdom, but now he wasn't so sure. This girl, with her flowing movements and radiant smile, seemed like the very definition of beauty. His heart felt warm, and he was filled with emotions he couldn't quite explain. He didn't know how long he sat there on his horse, just watching her, but he wished that she could never stop dancing. Suddenly, the horse let out a loud bleat, and the sound broke the magic of the moment. Nene stopped dancing, startled by the noise. She turned around and was shocked to see Prince Obora sitting on his horse, smiling at her. Her heart began to race. Had he been watching her all this time? How long had he been here? She felt a rush of shyness and panic. Not knowing what else to do, she quickly grabbed her basket and ran as fast as she could. She ran and ran, her feet pounding against the ground, until she reached her small hut. Once inside, she leaned against the wall, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. She felt both embarrassed and excited at the same time. The prince had seen her dancing under the Udara tree, and she wasn't sure if she felt foolish or proud. As Prince Obora rode his horse back to the palace, his heart felt heavy, and he couldn't stop thinking about the beautiful dancer he had seen under the Udara tree. She seemed like a goddess at first, moving with such grace and beauty that he could hardly believe she was human. He wondered how the gods could bless just one person with so much elegance and charm. Her image stayed in his mind, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake off the thought of her dancing, her smile, and the way she moved like the wind. While the village bustled with excitement for the festival and the masquerades danced around, filling the air with joy, Prince Obiora's thoughts were elsewhere. All he could think about was the dancing goddess he had seen that day. He went to the Udara tree many times, hoping to catch a glimpse of her again, but each time he was disappointed. She was never there. He found himself staring at the empty space where she had danced, wishing he could see her again, even just for a moment. He finally decided that he would have to wait until the day of the festival. Surely she would be there. There was no way any maiden would miss such a big event. At last, the day of the festival came, and the village was alive with excitement and laughter. The streets were crowded, filled with villagers who had returned home for this special celebration that only happened once a year. It was a time for everyone to give thanks to the gods for blessing their land and giving them a good harvest. The air was filled with the smell of delicious food, the sound of drums, and the happy voices of the people greeting one another. The maidens gathered in groups, walking towards the palace with a big smile on their faces, chattering excitedly. Some of them joked, "I won't go home single today." Others laughed and replied, "With all these handsome men around, someone must notice me today." They walked with high hopes, wearing their most beautiful clothes, their faces glowing with excitement and dreams of finding a good husband. The celebration began with the last dance of the masquerade for the year, their colorful costumes swelling and swelling to the beats of the drum. Then, it was time for the maidens to perform. The people cheered and clapped as the young women danced gracefully, their steps perfectly in tune with the music. Prince Obora sat on his throne, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching for the girl who had danced so beautifully under the udara tree. He looked past all the maidens, not even noticing Ngala or the many efforts she was making to catch his attention. His heart beat faster with hope, but as the event drew to a close, there was no sign of her. When the festivities ended, everyone was celebrating, but the prince felt a deep sadness as he walked back to his room. He had hoped with all his heart that he would see her, but she had not shown up. Was she even real? He had heard stories of spirits that danced under the udara tree in the afternoon, and he began to wonder if she could have been one of them. But he didn't care if she was human or a spirit. He just wanted to see her again. He felt enchanted by her and longed for just one more glimpse of her radiant smile. Nene had been preparing for the festival for weeks, but the night before her father fell ill. She had lost her mother many years ago, and since then, it had always been just her and her father. He was her whole world, and she couldn't imagine life without him. Her father, Mazi Okolo, saw the worry in her eyes and begged her to go to the festival. He knew how much it meant to her, but Nene refused. She wanted to stay by his side, to care for him and make sure he had everything he needed. The festival could wait till next year. Her father's health was her priority right now. They heard the loud sound of the drums as they sat under the shade of the tree in the front of their small hut. It lifted Nene's spirits, and she decided to dance for her father. She knew how much joy it brought to him to see her dance, and she wanted to lift his spirits and make him happy. She twirled and swayed with all the grace she had, her movements like a gentle breeze, her face bright with a smile. Mazi Okolo watched her, his heart swelling with pride and happiness. Nene was the greatest gift life had given him, and he prayed to the gods that they would bless her with a man who would always make her happy, just as she had brought him joy. As Nene danced, she felt peace in her heart, knowing that even though she had missed the festival, she had made her father smile, and that was worth more than anything in the world. She was truly a bundle of joy, a light in her father's life. Ngala sat on the ground in front of her hut, tears streaming down her cheeks. She felt a deep sadness in her heart because she knew she was losing the prince. When she had danced at the festival, she noticed how distant the prince seemed, as if he were looking for someone else, not caring at all that she was there. It was clear that he was serious about leaving her, but Ngala couldn't accept this. She clenched her fists and muttered to herself, "The prince will never have another maiden in this village. Not now, and definitely not ever." As she sat there weeping bitterly, her mother came over and sat beside her, feeling worried and sad to see her daughter in such distress. "Why are you crying, my child?" she asked gently. Ngala wiped her tears with the back of her hand and sniffled. "Mama, it's the prince. He's been ignoring me and I don't know why. Today at the festival, he didn't even look at me, not even once. His eyes kept searching the crowd, like he was looking for someone else." "What?" her mother exclaimed, her face showing shock and anger. "So, Obora wants to bring shame to this family. Did you two have a fight?" "Fight? No, Mama," Ngala replied, shaking her head. "I didn't do anything wrong. He just started avoiding me for no reason. Please, talk to Papa. We can't allow the prince treat our family with so much disrespect." Her mother sighed and said, "Don't worry, my dear. I will talk to your father when he returns from the farm. Tomorrow, we will go to the palace and find out what is going on. Obora wouldn't dare to disgrace us like that. How can he leave you when everyone in the village respects us and they are all looking forward to your coronation?" The next day, Chief Ikuku and his wife set out for the palace. When they arrived, the king welcomed them warmly. "How is our future queen doing?" he asked after they had all settled down. "That is what we want to find out from the prince," Chief Ikuku replied, his voice firm. "Ngala says that the prince has been ignoring her, and she is very upset." "No, that can't be," the king exclaimed. He quickly sent for the prince Obora and Queen Asa. When they were all gathered, the king began. "Obora, what is going on between you and your betrothed?" Obora had been expecting this conversation for a while, ever since he saw the dancing maiden under the Udara tree. He had stopped thinking about Ngala. He took a deep breath and cleared his throat. He had always obeyed his father, but this time, he was determined to stand up for what he felt was right. "Father, I cannot marry Ngala," he said firmly. "She has not been raised properly and shows no respect for others. You know how much I love our people, and I cannot marry someone who treats them poorly." The king listened carefully, knowing his son well, but he believed that Ngala was just being immature. "Son, all you need to do is to guide her, to call her to order. Perhaps she doesn't know how her actions make you feel. Remember, she is still young." "I tried that," Obora replied, frustration in his voice. "But she refused to take corrections and even walked out on me. Since then, she has not apologized, not even once. I have no more interest in her. She needs to learn good manners." He stood up, his face set with determination. "I beg to take my leave," he said, and walked out of the room. A heavy silence filled the room. The king and queen exchanged worried glances. They had never seen their son so angry before. Chief Ikuku and his wife sat with anger simmering in their hearts, feeling insulted by the prince's words. Finally, the queen broke the silence. "Chief, I think it would be wise for you to speak with your daughter. I will talk to my son. Don't worry, he will come around." Chief Ikuku's wife Ekema was fuming with anger as they left the palace. "The prince won't dare to disgrace our family like this," she shouted. and you just sat there without saying a word. Will you keep quiet, woman? Chief Ikuku backed back, his voice filled with frustration. I warned you that our daughter was growing up to be ill-mannered, but you didn't listen. Now look where it has landed us. How dare Ngala walk out on the prince? Do you not know that it is a sacrilege? You better speak to her. Because of her, Obora has just called us irresponsible to our faces, and it's all your fault. They argued all the way back home, their voices rising in anger. Days turned into weeks, but nothing seemed to change. Ngala, seeing that the prince had moved on from her, had tried to apologize to him, but he refused to see her or listen to her. So then she decided to give him some space, just as the queen had suggested. However, even with time, Ngala still didn't change her behavior. She continued to walk around the village, bullying others and treating them as if they were beneath her. She acted as if nothing was wrong, and everyone began to wonder if she would ever learn her lesson. One sunny afternoon, Prince Obora was strolling through the village as he often did, greeting the people and enjoying the warm breeze. As he walked along the dusty paths, he suddenly spotted her, the beautiful maiden who had been in his thoughts ever since he first saw her dancing under the Udara tree. His heart leaped with excitement as he watched her come closer. She was carrying a basket filled with vegetables and other food items, and he guessed that she must be returning from the market. He had searched for so long, hoping for another chance to see her, and now, at last, here she was. It felt like a blessing from the gods. He stopped his horse, his face bright with a smile, as he greeted her warmly. Nene, however, felt a little shy. She wasn't sure how to act around the prince. She knew he was kind and gentle, but she didn't understand why he seemed so interested in her. Her heart beat fast as she looked up at him. "Greetings, my prince," she said softly, bowing her head in respect. "Greetings to you, gifted one," Prince Obora replied, his smile growing wider. "It seems you are returning from the market. How have you been?" "I'm fine, my prince," Nene answered, her voice barely above a whisper. Prince Obora didn't want to scare her away, so he chose his words very carefully. He wanted to make her feel comfortable and to make her smile again. "I would love to know your name," he said gently. "Are you from this kingdom?" "Yes, my prince," she replied with a nod. "My name is Nene." "What a beautiful name," he said, his eyes shining with admiration. "It suits a beautiful maiden like you. I was truly enchanted watching you dance the other day, and after that, I have searched endlessly for you. I would love to see you dance again. Is it something you could do for me?" Nene's face lit up with a smile, and Prince Obora's heart soared. This was a smile he had dreamed of for so many weeks. Seeing it now filled him with joy. "No one can say no to the prince," Nene replied, her voice soft and sweet. "It would be my pleasure if it would make you happy." Prince Obora felt a wave of excitement wash through him. "Then, let's make it a date," he said eagerly. "Tomorrow in the evening, we shall meet again at the magical spot where I first saw you dance. Thank you so much for granting my wish. It means a lot to me." With a grateful smile and a wave of his hand, the prince turned his horse and rode back to the palace, his heart dancing with joy. He could hardly wait for the next day to come. He felt as if he had found something truly special, and he counted down the hours until he could see her again. And so, the friendship between Prince Obora and Nene began to blossom like a beautiful flower. Each day, as the sun began to set, they would meet under the Udara tree, where their bond grew stronger with every passing moment. Prince Obora had a special talent for playing the oja, a flute that made the sweetest sounds, and Nene was the perfect partner for him. Her graceful dance steps seemed to dance along with the music he played, her body moving with such elegance that it felt like the wind was carrying her. These meetings became their daily evening routine. Every evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, they would sit together under the shade of the Udara tree. Prince Obora felt like he was living in a dream. The time he spent with Nene was the happiest time of his life. He found himself looking forward to their time together, counting the hours until he could see her again. He realized that he wanted more than just to watch her dance. He wanted her friendship and laughter, and also her love. He wanted Nene to be a part of his life forever. However, not everything went unnoticed in the village. Some villagers had seen the prince and Nene together under the Udara tree on several occasions. Whispers quickly spread. Some villagers were pleased, especially those who did not like Ngala and were tired of her prideful behavior. They hoped that this new friendship would bring Ngala back down to earth and humble her. But others, those who were loyal to her, were not happy at all. They rushed to her, eager to share the news that the prince had been spending time with another maiden from the village. Ngala's face darkened with anger when she heard this news. "This cannot be," she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. "Obora cannot do this to me. He cannot humiliate me in front of the entire village like this." She felt a burning rage inside her, knowing that the prince might be slipping away from her grasp. She knew she had to act fast. She needed to do something to stop this from happening. She was determined that no other maiden would take her place beside the prince. Now, it was clear to Ngala that the prince had moved on from her. She could no longer deny what she had been hearing. The whispers in the village, the glances people gave her. She felt a storm of anger brewing inside her. And that night, she could no longer hold it in. With fury burning in her heart, she stormed to the palace, her footsteps heavy and fast. When she reached the gate, she began shouting at the top of her voice, "Obora! Obora, come out now! You cannot dump me like this, not in front of the whole village." Her loud cries echoed through the palace walls, catching the attention of the king and his queen. They hurried out to see what was causing such commotion. They found Ngala red-faced and furious, still screaming the prince's name. Prince Obora had not yet returned to the palace. "What's going on, Ngala?" the queen asked gently, trying to calm her down. "Why are you shouting like this?" "It's the prince," Ngala cried, her voice trembling with anger and tears. "He is seeing another maiden in this village. He has abandoned me." Her pride was shattered, and she felt her whole world crashing around her. She couldn't imagine life without the royal privilege she had always dreamed of. She could already hear the villagers laughing and mocking her. Just then, they heard the sound of hoofs, and Prince Obora rode into the palace. The moment Ngala saw him, she rushed towards him, her face twisted with rage. "You cheat," she spat, her voice filled with venom. "How dare you see another maiden in this village?" Prince Obora held her back, looking straight into her eyes. "It's over between us, Ngala," he said firmly. "I cannot have someone like you as my queen. Your behavior is disgusting. You need to work on yourself and then get ready for the next man who comes along. I'm done." "No, you don't mean that," the king said, stepping forward, shocked by his son's words. "Father," Obora replied, his voice steady, "she has refused to change, and I cannot deal with her anymore." Ngala felt her knees give away as she collapsed to the floor, pleading with the prince, tears streaming down her face. It felt like her whole life was falling apart. She had grown up, believing she was meant to be queen, living like a princess and preparing for her future on the throne. And now, just like that, all of that was slipping through her fingers like sand. The king and queen stood there helpless. They knew their son's mind was made up, and there was little they could do to change it. They gently asked Ngala to go home, saying they would talk to Obora and try to make him change his mind. But Ngala was not listening. Her heart was filled with bitterness and rage. "Who is this maiden who dares to take my place?" she shouted. "I swear by the gods, I will kill her. I will kill her." As Ngala walked away from the palace, her steps were quick and angry, her face dark with fury. The villagers who saw her coming knew to move aside and let her pass. They could see the storm in her eyes and knew it was best to stay out of her way. Ngala asked around the village, trying to find out who the maiden was that had caught Prince Obora's eye. When she finally discovered it was Nene, the poor girl, she couldn't believe it. "That poor, dirty thing," she shouted, her voice filled with anger. "Obora chose that piece of rag over me. I won't let him have her. Not when I'm still alive. This won't happen." She began to follow and monitor Nene with the help of her maids. Nene walked to the farm every morning, taking a narrow, lonely path through the bush. It was a quiet route with thick trees on either side, and not many people passed by. Ngala decided that she and her friends would hide there and wait for Nene. They would teach her a lesson she would never forget. That morning, Nene left her small hut, humming a cheerful tune as she headed to the farm. She felt happy, not knowing the trouble that was waiting for her up her head. As she reached the narrow path, she heard a strange sound, like leaves rustling. Before she could even turn to see where the noise was coming from, Ngala and her group of girls rushed at her. They took her by surprise, pushing her to the ground and attacking her with all their strength. Nene tried to defend herself, but there were too many of them. She cried out, pleading for them to stop, but they were too angry to listen. "You thief," they shouted. "You man snatcher." Ngala stood over her, her voice filled with fury. "How dare you take what is mine?" she screamed. "Don't you know who I am in this village? I warn you, stay away from the prince. This is just a small warning." If I ever see you near him again, you will regret it. You should know what I'm capable of, she threatened. I will make you disappear, she said, her voice cold and menacing. Then she laughed, a wicked, cruel sound that made the other girls laugh along with her. When they were done, they left Nene lying on the ground, bruised and in pain. Tears streamed down her face as she slowly picked herself up, hurting all over. When Nene finally reached home, she told her father Mazi Okoro everything that happened. His face grew sad and his shoulders slumped with worry. Nene, my dear, he said softly, we are just commoners in this village. I think it's best for you to stay away from the prince. This is not a fight you can win, and I don't want to lose you. I believe there will be another man who will love you dearly. Nene nodded, tears still in her eyes. She knew her father was right. Even though the prince hadn't asked her to be his, she understood that she needed to stay away from him. She was the only family her father had left, and she knew that Ngala was serious about her threats. She didn't want to put her father's life or her own in danger. That evening, Prince Obora sat under the Udara tree with his oja in his hand, waiting eagerly for his new friend Nene. He had thought carefully about how to tell her how he truly felt. He wanted to share his feelings with her, to let her know that she had captured his heart. But as he sat there, the minutes passed and there was no sign of her. He waited and waited, his eyes searching the path, hoping to see her familiar figure appear. The sky grew darker, and he began to worry. Maybe something had delayed her, he thought. Maybe she was on her way. Then he heard footsteps approaching, and his heart jumped with excitement. He looked eagerly towards the sound, hoping it was Nene. But as the figure came closer, he realized it wasn't her. It was someone else, someone familiar. It was Ngala. So, this is it, Ngala said, her voice filled with pain and anger. What are you doing here? Prince Obora asked, disappointment clear on his face. He had not expected to see her. Is that really the question you should be asking? Ngala replied, raising her voice. I am still betrothed to you, and what you are doing is cheating on me. I was just a child when my parents betrothed me to you, Obora replied calmly. I have tried to love you all these years, but Ngala, I cannot be with a woman who behaves like you do. These words provoked Ngala, and without warning, Ngala raised her hand and slapped the prince across his face. Prince Obora stared at her in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief. Tell me, she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. Is she better than me? What do you see in that piece of rags? Obora, why have you chosen to disgrace me like this? Prince Obiora's anger flared up inside him. For a moment, he felt like lashing out and beating her up until she could no longer breathe. But he remembered how he had been raised to never hurt a woman, no matter how angry he felt. He gave Ngala a cold, stern look and turned to walk away from her. But just as he turned to leave, Ngala's voice cut through the night air, stopping him in his tracks. Obora, you have just drawn the battle line, she said, her voice full of fury. Since you have chosen to disgrace me and my family in this village, know this. It's over my dead body that you will have another maiden in this village. Prince Obora felt a chill run down his spine. He knew Ngala well. and he knew she never made empty threats. As he rode back to the palace that night, two things weighed heavily on his mind: the safety of Nene and the seriousness of Ngala's threat. He worried about what Ngala might do. The king and queen were sitting quietly in the palace when Prince Obora walked in. His face was tight with anger, and his steps were quick and heavy. They could see right away that something was troubling him deeply. "What's wrong, my son?" the queen asked, her face full of worry as she leaned forward looking into his eyes. Obora sat down, then took a deep breath and looked at his parents. "Father, Mother," he began, his voice firm but respectful. "I know you both care about me, but my happiness and the peace of this kingdom are important too. I have thought about it for long, and I want us to officially end the engagement between Ngala and me. Yes, the agreement between our families still stands, but it needs to be broken. I don't want to ever see her near me again," he finished, his voice filled with determination. The king and queen exchanged a long, thoughtful glance. They could see how serious their son was. They knew that for Prince Obora to speak like this, something very serious must have happened. They had tried before to convince him to give Ngala another chance, but now they realized that he had made up his mind. They cared deeply about his happiness, and it was clear that Ngala was not the right woman for him. "We understand, my son," the king finally said, nodding slowly. "We will arrange a meeting with Ngala's family soon to discuss this matter. You have been a good and obedient son, and we want you to be happy." The queen reached out and took Obora's hand gently. "Yes, we have heard you," she added softly, "and we will do what needs to be done." They both looked at their son with love and understanding, knowing that this was not an easy decision, but believing it was the right one for him. Ngala sat under the big tree in front of their beautiful hut, crying bitterly. Her face was wet with tears, and she refused to be consoled. She had been sitting there for 3 long days, ever since the engagement between her and the prince was called off. Her heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. Her whole family was filled with sadness and despair. No one could find the right words to make each other feel better. This was the worst disgrace they had ever faced, and it felt like a dark cloud hung over their home. The news of the broken engagement spread quickly throughout the village, and it seemed like everyone was talking about it. The villagers couldn't stop whispering and giggling. At night, when the maidens gathered under the moonlight to chat and gossip, this was their favorite story to tell. They laughed loudly, making fun of Ngala, even imitating the way she walked with her nose in the air. "Now, she is just like the rest of us," they would say, bursting into laughter with tears running down their eyes. Her pride brought her this fall. They clapped their hands and laughed until their sides hurt. While Ngala mourned, the villagers seemed to be celebrating, happy to see the queen of their kingdom fall so hard to the ground. Ngala's mother was not spared either. When she went to the market, the village women whispered and giggled behind her back, sometimes even saying hurtful words aloud. It was a very big shame for her family, and everywhere they went, they felt the sting of people's laughter and mockery. Each day, Prince Obora grew more worried. He hadn't seen Nene in days, and his heart was heavy with concern. He could not stop thinking about her, wondering what had gone wrong. Finally, he decided he had to go to her home and find out for himself. He called for 2 of his special guards and filled the royal carriage with gifts. He was determined to find the woman who had stolen his heart and was driving him mad with longing. When the prince arrived at Neche's compound, he saw her father Mazi Okolo sitting outside his hut, sharpening a cutlass. As soon as Okolo spotted the prince and his royal escort, his face turned serious, his brows knitting into a deep frown. Though everyone in the village knew Prince Obora was a kind and fair man, Okolo still felt uneasy. Neche was his only child, his whole world, and he had to protect her. The prince approached him with a warm smile and greeted politely. "I have come to see your daughter," he said, his voice calm and respectful. Mazi Okolo looked up at him, and it was clear from his expression that he was not pleased. "My prince," he began slowly, "I feel honored to have you here, but we do not wish to have anything more to do with you. My daughter does not want to see you." Obora felt a wave of shock and confusion. Had he done something wrong? He had thought maybe Neche was ill, but now it seemed clear that she was avoiding him. "I love your daughter very much," he finally managed to say, his voice filled with emotion. "I have no wish to harm her. My intentions are pure," he added, almost pleading. Mazi Okolo sighed deeply, his eyes filled with worry. "Neche is all I have in this world," he replied, "and I cannot let anything happen to her. You were betrothed to another, and it's not right for you to love someone else. I have ended that engagement, and it's official," the prince interrupted quickly. Mazi Okolo could see the sincerity in the prince's eyes, but he still felt fear gripping his heart. "I'm not sure that Ngala is over you," he said, his voice tense. She gathered some girls and attacked Neche, beating her badly. She warned her to stay away from you and even threatened to make her disappear. "My prince, I beg you, find another maiden in this village and leave my daughter alone. I cannot bear to lose her." Prince Obiora's eyes hardened. "I will protect her," he said firmly. "I will not force her to love me, but if she does, I will guard her with my life and make sure nothing happens to her. You have my word." Anger simmered inside him as he thought of what Ngala had done. How dare she hurt the woman he loved? After a long pause, Mazi Okolo finally agreed to let the prince see Neche. When Prince Obiora saw her, he felt his heart swell with emotion. It was like he was seeing the very air he needed to breathe. At that moment, he realized how deeply he wanted her to be a part of his life. He handed her the gifts he had brought, and she accepted them with a grateful smile. They sat under the shade of the tree, and the prince poured out his heart to her. He told her how much he loved her, how she had filled his thoughts every day they were apart. Neche listened, her heart beating fast. She had also fallen in love with him. She had never stopped thinking about him, but she knew she had to be careful for her father's sake. "My prince," she said, looking worried, "I have nothing to offer you. I am only but a poor maiden, left with an old man who needs my care and attention. Besides, I do not want any problem with Ngala. You know how she could be. She threatened me, and I'm really scared after the beatings I received." The prince moved closer, looking into her eyes. "I will protect you with my life. I will ensure that no harm comes near you or your family. You have my word." Nature was silent, trying to process all the prince had just said to her. Why did the prince have to choose her of all the maidens in the village? What could she possibly offer him? The prince, seeing the fear in her eyes, held her hands as he spoke. "Nature, tell me, do you love me?" Nature was silent, afraid to tell the prince how she felt about him. "Do you love me?" he asked again. Nature nodded. "I love you, my prince," she said. "Then look at me. Trust me. I mean it when I say that I will protect you." "I will protect you with every fiber in me," the prince assured her. "If you want 1,000 escorts, I will give them to you." This made Nature laugh. She could see his face and how serious he seemed to be, like he meant every single word he had spoken. They spent the rest of the day talking, laughing, and sharing stories. Nature was a very shy maiden, but the prince knew how to make her laugh or talk. Before the prince left, he pleaded with her to dance while he played his oja. He had missed watching her dance so much. The way she moved so gracefully like a gentle breeze, melting his heart in ways that he could not understand. From where he sat, Mazi Okoro watched them with a smile spreading across his face. He saw the light and happiness in his daughter's eyes, a glow he knew so well. His daughter was in love, and it warmed his heart to see how happy she was. The days and weeks that followed was a happy one for the two lovebirds. Prince Obora hardly spent a day without seeing Nature, and he made their relationship an open one. They were always seen together, walking down the village road hand in hand, or sitting at the river bank watching the peaceful water and enjoying the cool evening breeze. They would chat and laugh as if they had no single care in this world. Prince Obora adored Nature deeply, and it was clear to anyone who saw them together. He treated her like she was the most precious treasure in the world, always gentle and kind, always making sure she felt special. In Nature he found true love and happiness, something he had never felt before, and he couldn't get enough of her. Nature, who had once been just an ordinary girl in the village, was now known by everyone. The villagers grew to love her because she treated everyone with kindness and respect. She always greeted people with a warm smile, and she showed a humble, friendly attitude that made people feel good. She was everything they hoped Ngala would be, but never was. One evening, as they sat by the river bank, Prince Obora turned to Nature with a serious look in his eyes. "I want you to meet my parents," he said softly. "What?" Nature exclaimed, her heart suddenly racing with a mix of excitement and fear. "What are you so afraid of?" the prince asked, noticing the worry on her face. "I don't know," she replied, her voice trembling a bit. "I'm not sure they will accept me." "And why do you think that?" Prince Obora asked gently. "Because I'm just a commoner," she said quietly. "I am a nobody in this village. They might not think highly of me." The prince chuckled softly and said, "You are no longer a commoner, Nature. Don't you see how the villagers look at you when we walk together? You are as important as I am now, and my parents are eager to meet you." Nature's eyes widened in surprise. "They want to see me?" she asked. "Yes," the prince replied with a smile. "They asked to meet you themselves. I'm sure they will love you. If for no reason, then for how happy you make me." The night before her visit to the palace, Nature's father, Mazi Okoro, couldn't stop giving her advice. "Be yourself, my dear," he said seriously. "Don't try to be something you are not, so you could please them." You see, the palace is so beautiful and filled with many treasured stones. Do not touch anything. We can't pay for them if you break them. Don't drink or eat too much, and don't admire things too openly. Remember, they just want to see if you are a good match for their son. Nene laughed at how serious her father looked while giving her these instructions. Don't worry, Papa, she reassured him. You raised me well, and I will do as you say. The next evening, the prince came to pick Nene up in the royal carriage. Nene looked stunning in the beautiful gown that Prince Obora had gifted her. He wanted her to look her best for this important visit. When they arrived at the palace, the king and queen welcomed her warmly. As soon as they saw Nene, they smiled at each other and whispered to their son, "She will make a fine queen." The rest of the evening was spent in joy. They ate delicious food, talked and laughed together, trying their best to make Nene feel comfortable and at home. Nene felt all her previous fear washed away. She wasn't used to such a grand lifestyle, but she remembered her father's advice and stayed calm and humble throughout the evening. The king and queen were impressed, and Prince Obiora's heart swelled with happiness, knowing he had chosen well. Ngala had heard all about the prince's new love, and it felt like a knife in her heart. She had once walked around the village with her head held high, thinking she would soon be the queen. Now her wings were clipped, and she could no longer parade herself as the future queen. Her heart was filled with bitterness and anger. It was the greatest shame she had ever felt. She had been so close to becoming the next queen of her village, but suddenly she was just like any other girl. One day, hiding behind some bushes, she watched as Prince Obora and Nene sat together talking and laughing happily. She felt her heart ache with pain and jealousy. "I won't let you have him," she whispered fiercely. "Not now and not ever. I would rather die first." Weeks went by, and it seemed like everything in the village had settled down. The prince was making plans to settle down with Nene, although people still whispered about it quietly around the palace. During this time, on a very hot afternoon, Nene returned home from farm tired and sweaty. She noticed that there was no water in the house, so she decided to go to the stream to fetch some. As she walked along the dusty path to the river, the air was still and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds. It was no surprise, as no one would want to fetch water under the scorching sun. When Nene reached the cool, clear river, she bent down and dipped her pot into the water. But just as she was about to fill it, she heard a voice behind her. Her heart skipped a beat and she quickly turned. It was Ngala. "Look who we have here," Ngala sneered, a wicked smile playing on her lips. Nene tried to ignore her and picked up her pot ready to leave. But Ngala stepped in front of her, blocking her path. 4 other maidens stood behind Ngala, the ones who always followed her orders without question. "Where do you think you are going?" Ngala asked, her voice cold and sharp. "Did you think I was joking the last time? I told you to stay away from my man, but you didn't listen." "Please, Ngala," Nene pleaded softly. "Don't you dare call me by my name," Ngala thundered, her eyes blazing with fury. "I am your queen and you must show me respect. Get on your knees now." Nene stood her ground, her voice steady as she replied, "I have done nothing wrong to you. The engagement between you and the prince is over. Why are you punishing me? I didn't steal your man." Ngala's face twisted with anger and her hand flew out, slapping Nene hard across the face. "How dare you remind me of my pain," she shouted. "How dare you speak to me like that?" The other girls quickly joined her, and together they pushed Nene with all their strength, shoving her into the deep river. They stood at the riverbank, watching as Nene struggled in the water, her arms flaying as she tried to stay afloat. "I can't let you have him," Ngala screamed, her voice filled with madness. Nene continued to struggle, fighting for her life. But slowly her head disappeared beneath the water, and she became invincible. "If I can't have him," Ngala declared, pounding her chest with her fist, "then no one will." She turned to the girls standing behind her, their faces pale with fear. "Not a single word of this must reach the village," she ordered. "If anyone talks, you all are as good as dead." The girls nodded quickly, their hearts pounding with fear, knowing they had no choice but to obey. It was getting late, and Maziokolo was growing more and more worried. His daughter Nene had been gone for hours. She had left earlier that afternoon to fetch water from the river, but she usually didn't stay this long. Would she have gone to see the prince, he wondered. She was supposed to come back home to prepare lunch. How could she leave her chores to spend time with him? As the sky grew darker and the sun began to set, a heavy feeling settled in his chest. Something was wrong. He could feel it deep in his bones. Just then, he saw the prince riding swiftly into the compound on his horse. Maziokolo's heart jumped with hope, but when he looked closer, he realized that the prince was alone. The prince jumped down from his horse and hurried towards him. "Greetings, Nai," Prince Obora said quickly. "I've come to check on Nene to see if she is well." "What? Nene?" Maziokolo replied, his voice filled with panic. "Is she not with you?" "No," the prince answered, looking worried. "We agreed to meet this evening at the riverbank, but when I didn't see her, I decided to come find out if she had fallen sick." Tears began to roll down Maziokolo's cheeks. "She's all I have, Prince. I told you, she's all I have. She left this afternoon to fetch water, and she has not returned since," he cried, his voice breaking with fear. A cold shiver ran down the prince's spine. His heart pounded with worry. How could this be? Where could she have gone? "Mazi, please try to stay calm," he said. "I will send the royal guards to search the entire village." Without wasting another second, the prince jumped back on his horse and rode off, shouting orders for the guards to begin searching. The whole village was soon in a state of panic. The men moved from hut to hut, asking everyone if they had seen Nene. They combed all the bushes, the farmland, and searched every corner of the village. But after hours of looking, there was no sign of her. Nene was nowhere to be found. The prince was devastated. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he sat by the riverbank where they often sat together. His heart ached with pain. Nene, his beloved, was gone. He had loved her more than anyone else, and she had brought so much joy to his life. As he sat there, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Ngala's threat. With a sense of urgency, he jumped back on his horse and raced to Ngala's hut. "Ngala! Ngala!" he shouted angrily. "Where are you?" Ngala came out of her horse looking annoyed. "Why are you shouting my name like a mad dog?" she snapped. "Haven't you done enough? Or are you not done embarrassing my family?" The prince ignored her words. "Where is Nene?" he demanded, his voice filled with fury. "Nene," Ngala scoffed. "Since when did I start safeguarding your cheap whore?" "Do not call her that," Obora shouted with a clenched fist. "You made a threat, Ngala," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I'm sure you know what has happened to her." Where is she?" "I said those words out of anger," Ngala replied, trying to sound innocent. "I didn't mean them. I don't know where she is." Ngala seemed so convincing that the prince, though still doubtful, felt his anger waver. "Ngala, if I find out that you had anything to do with this, I will never forgive you," he warned her before turning to leave. He headed back to Maziokolo's house with a very heavy heart. The old man was crying bitterly, and many villagers had gathered around, trying to comfort him. Prince Obiora's heart was heavy with guilt as he watched Okolo. He had promised to protect Neche and had failed. Now he felt it was his duty to care for her father, who meant the world to Neche. He couldn't just leave him like that. He lifted Maziokolo and helped him onto his horse. Then he took him back with him to the palace. They would continue to hope, to wait and to pray that Neche would be found safe and sound. The prince knew he had to take care of Okolo, just as Neche would have wanted. It was as if a dark cloud had covered the entire kingdom. Everyone was sad and worried about the sudden disappearance of Neche. The whole village felt like it was in mourning. Mazi Okolo, Neche's father, could not stop crying. He refused to be comforted. His heart was broken, and he wailed bitterly day and night. Prince Obiora was also deeply affected. Every day he would go to the Udara tree, where he had first met Neche, hoping and praying that she might appear out of nowhere. He would sit there for hours, his heart aching, but she never came. Other times he might go to the riverbank, sitting by the water where they used to laugh and talk, hoping that she might suddenly come and join him. But nothing ever changed. The prince felt as if he couldn't live anymore, as if a piece of his soul had been taken away. "Neche, where are you?" he would cry out, his voice filled with sorrow. Meanwhile, far beneath the surface of the river, as Neche was drowning, a beautiful mermaid named Nene saw her. Nene had witnessed what had happened and felt sorry for Neche. She called her mermaid friends, and together they gently carried Neche to their underwater kingdom, determined to keep her safe. They moved carefully with great kindness, feeling so sad for the poor girl who had been hurt so badly by those on land. When Neche woke up, she found herself lying in a beautiful house surrounded by clear sparkling water. The walls shimmered with colors she had never seen before, and everything looked magical. She looked around in wonder, trying to understand where she was and how she had gotten there. Just then, a lovely mermaid entered the room. She had long flowing hair and eyes that were kind and gentle. Neche stared at her in awe. "Don't be scared," the mermaid said softly. "My name is Nene, and I don't intend to harm you. We only want to keep you safe from the wicked humans, who wouldn't stop at anything to destroy another for no just reason." As Nene spoke, memories came flooding back to Neche's mind. She remembered how Ngala had pushed her into the river. Tears filled her eyes and they rolled down her cheeks. "My father," Neche cried, her voice trembling. "I need to go back to him. He would be so sad right now." "You can't go back, Neche," Nene replied gently. "If you do, Ngala won't stop until she harms you." "How do you know about Ngala?" she asked, surprised. "We live in your village," Nene replied, "just that we live under the water. We see and hear everything that happens there. Remember, we are not humans. We have supernatural abilities, and we know how to get informations." She looked at Nene with pity and compassion. You have a pure heart, and we will keep you safe. When the right time comes, you will return. Don't worry about your father. The prince is taking very good care of him. Nene nodded, still feeling a little overwhelmed but relieved to hear that her father was okay. We will have a welcome party for you tonight, Nene continued with a smile, so you can meet everyone in our kingdom. They are kind and friendly. We are making a special tale for you, a very beautiful one, so you can be like us. You will feel at home here, I promise. And if you need anything, just call me. You are Nene, and now we are friends. Nene couldn't help but smile back. Nene looked so beautiful and kind, and Nene felt a small sense of peace in her heart, even in this strange and new place. Thank you, Nene, for saving me, Nene whispered, feeling grateful. Of course, Nene replied warmly. I couldn't let a human with such a beautiful heart be lost forever. Nene felt a warm glow inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she would be okay in this new place after all. Months passed, like leaves drifting in the wind, and Nene slowly grew used to her new life in the river. She missed her father dearly and thought of Prince Obora every single day. But she knew deep in her heart that it wasn't time to return. The mermaids were taking good care of her, making sure she felt at home. They showered her with kindness, helping her forget the sorrow and worries that had weighed her down. Their world was filled with laughter, warmth and joy, unlike anything she had ever known. She felt surrounded by friends who treated her like family. It was a world so different from the one she had left behind, and yet, every night, she wished for just one glimpse of her father's face or a whisper of Obora's voice. On the land, Nene's father was slowly getting better, though there were still moments when his eyes filled with tears, but there was nothing he could do. Prince Obora made sure that the old man was well cared for, providing him with everything he could ever need. Yet, the prince himself was far from well. Each day felt longer than the rest, his heart heavy with longing for Nene. Once, he had been a lively young man, always seen laughing and roaming around the village with a bright smile. Now, that light had dimmed, and he was but a shadow of his former self. The king and queen grew worried. They tried to comfort him with words, to lift his spirits, but nothing seemed to help. Even Ngala, who felt that Nene was out of the picture and that she could now have the prince to herself, felt disappointed. She found out that no matter how hard she tried, the prince barely noticed her. She tried for weeks, months even, before finally giving up, though a part of her refused to let go of hope. 3 long years dragged by, and the prince remained lost in his sadness. He never stopped thinking about Nene, his eyes always searching through the crowds, hoping to see her appear, just once from anywhere. The king, now growing old, knew the time had come for the prince to choose a wife and prepare to take over the throne. Many fine maidens from the village had been suggested, but Obora turned them all away, unwilling to consider any of them. The king, feeling desperate, decided to call upon Okolo, Nene's father, whom the prince respected deeply. The king hoped that Okolo could speak to his son and help him see reason. Okolo agreed and met with the prince that evening in the quiet of the palace garden. As they sat together, their faces filled with sadness, their eyes heavy with unspoken thoughts. "I'm sorry," the prince began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for not keeping my promise." "For how long will you be sorry, Obora?" Okolo asked gently. Haven't you tortured yourself enough? It's been 3 years since she disappeared. Don't you think it's time to let go? The villagers in this kingdom depend on you, and you can't continue like this. Listen to your father's advice. Get a wife. Move on with your life. Please, my prince. Prince Obora had been silent the whole time, his eyes staring off into the distance. Finally, he sighed deeply and spoke. I don't think I can move on, he admitted, his voice filled with pain. I see her everywhere. I feel her presence like she's still alive. Somewhere I can't reach. I can't love another woman like I loved her. His eyes glistened with tears as he spoke. You can, Obora, Okolo said softly. Nature was a kind soul, a sweetheart who only wanted others to be happy. Wherever she is now, I'm sure she would want you to be happy too. You are not betraying her by choosing to live again. Please, think about it. And thank you, my prince, for being that son I never had. He placed a comforting hand on the prince's shoulder. Obora nodded but remained silent. He felt a deep ache in his heart. What he shared with nature was something special, something he didn't want to let go of. But he also had a duty, a responsibility to his people, and Okolo was right. It had been 3 long years. The prince finally agreed to settle down with another maiden from the village, but his heart still felt heavy and unsure. He told his father he would marry, but he couldn't choose for himself. You can pick any maiden you think is right, he said softly. I'm not ready to open my heart to anyone else, but I know I must do this for the sake of our kingdom. I can't fail again like I failed Nene. His voice was filled with sadness, but there was also determination in his eyes. The king felt a wave of happiness wash over him. This was a big step for his son, a sign that maybe he could heal and find love again. The king was determined to make this special moment something that could bring back hope to the prince's heart. He truly believed that love would come again, even if it took time. With excitement bubbling inside him, the king sent out the town crier to spread the news. The crier's voice rang through every street and corner, announcing, in 14 market days, the prince will choose a wife. All the beautiful maidens of the village are invited to gather at the palace, dressed in their finest clothes, to showcase their most beautiful dance steps. The news spread like wildfire, and soon the entire kingdom was buzzing with excitement. Everywhere you went, there were talk of the great event. The streets were filled with laughter and joy, and the air was alive with the sound of chatter and music. Every maiden dreamed of being the next queen, of standing beside Prince Obora, who was not just handsome, but also kind and gentle. Many hearts fluttered with hope and excitement at the thought of being chosen by him. Groups of maidens walked together to the stream to fetch water or to the market to buy food, their voices filled with excitement as they spoke of the dance competition. They whispered about what dresses they would wear and how they would dance to win the prince's heart. The market too was filled with a festive mood as people talked and laughed about the upcoming celebration. Everyone wanted to be a part of the prince's big day. Ngala the maiden, who had once hoped to win Obora's heart, felt a new surge of hope. This was another chance to reclaim what she believed was hers. She went around the village with her head held high, boasting confidently, I will win back the prince this time. She believed with all her heart that this was her moment to shine. Every evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Gala practiced her dance steps under the shade of a big tree. She moved with all her strength and energy, as if her life depended on each step. She twirled and spun, imagining the day she would stand before the prince, her heart racing with excitement and hope. She was determined to win, to take back her crown, and nothing could stop her. As the days passed, the anticipation grew. The villages buzzed with excitement, and everyone counted down the days. The young and the old, the rich and poor, all felt the thrill in the air. It seemed as if the whole kingdom was waiting for the grand day the prince would choose his bride, and everyone wondered who it would be. The day was drawing near, and hearts were filled with hopes and dreams. A few days before the grand event, Ngala was already feeling very proud of herself. She had practiced her dance steps to perfection, and she was sure that she would win the prince's heart. But then, an idea came to her mind. Why not do something extra? Something that would make sure she doesn't leave the palace without becoming the prince's bride. She decided she needed a little more help to make her dream come true. Ngala quickly went to her mother and shared her plan. Together, they decided to visit a powerful native doctor who lived in a distant village far away from their own. The journey was long, but Ngala didn't mind. She was determined. When they finally reached the old man's hut, they explained what they wanted. The native doctor listened carefully, then gave a knowing smile. He mixed herbs and strange ingredients into a thick paste and handed it to them in a small clay pot. "This is a special pomade," he said with a sly grin. "On the day of the dance, rub it all over your body before you go to the palace. When the prince sees you dance, he will not be able to look away. His heart will be drawn to you and he will choose you as his bride." Ngala and her mother was overjoyed. They thanked the native doctor and rewarded him with many cowries. With hearts filled with excitement, they began their journey back to the village, feeling sure that they had secured Ngala's future as the next queen. Finally, the morning of the great event arrived. The sound of drums filled the air early in the morning, echoing throughout the village and signaling the start of a happy day ahead. The whole village seemed to come alive with excitement. Maidens danced with joy, dreaming of becoming the prince's chosen bride. Everyone, young and old, was eager to see what would happen. Such a grand event had never been seen before. As the sun climbed high into the sky, brightening everything with its golden lights, people began to gather at the palace. The maidens came dressed in their most colorful and beautiful attires, their faces glowing with excitement and hope. The villagers too were all dressed in their best clothes, eager to watch the spectacle. Ngala marched proudly with her friends, who acted as her escorts, surrounding her like guards. She held her head high, her heart pounding with excitement as she made her way to the palace. She felt confident that this was her day. Today she would become the prince's bride again. She could feel it in her bones. Under a large, beautifully decorated canopy sat the king and queen, their faces bright with smiles. Next to them sat Prince Obora. His face, however, was blank, showing no emotion. He stared at the crowd gathered in the big palace compound, his mind far away, lost in his thoughts. And then the drums beat louder, and the dance began. One by one, the maidens stepped forward, moving gracefully to the rhythm of the music, their colorful skirts swirling around them. The crowd cheered and clapped, enjoying every step, every twirl. Ngala watched carefully, her heart beating faster with every passing moment. She knew her time was coming. She took a deep breath, feeling the magic pomade on her skin. She was ready, more than ready. This was her chance, and she was determined to make it unforgettable. One by one, the maidens stepped forward, their feet moving in rhythm with the beat of the drums, their waists swaying and twisting, trying to catch the prince's eye. Each one hoped that her dance would be the one to make him smile, to make him see her and only her. But Prince Obiora remained still, his face expressionless, his eyes distant. As each maiden finished her dance and stepped back, he did not seem moved. He did not clap or cheer. He just sat, staring ahead, as if lost in another world. Ngala stood off to the side, a sly smile spreading across her face. She watched the other maidens with a smug look, feeling sure that the prince was hers and hers alone. She thought to herself, none of these girls can compete with me. When her turn finally came, she stepped forward with confidence. She danced harder than she had ever danced before, her feet moving quickly, her waist shaking, her arms gracefully waving in the air. She twirled and spun, determined to make the prince see her and fall under her spell. But as Ngala danced, she noticed something strange. The prince was not looking at her. He seemed distant, his face still without any sign of interest or joy. He did not even glance her way. Ngala felt confusion creeping in. The charm, the special pomade was supposed to make the prince fall for her instantly. Why wasn't it working? What had gone wrong? Soon all the maidens had finished their dances and the prince had chosen no one. The air grew thick with disappointment and the crowd began to whisper among themselves. The king, sitting under the grand canopy, frowned deeply. He looked at his son with anger in his eyes and called out, "What is happening? You have to make your choice, Obiora." But the prince did not answer. Instead, he stood up as if to leave. Just then, the music changed. A new soft melody filled the air, and everyone turned to see a maiden sitting upon a white horse, her figure glowing in the sunlight. Her face was hidden behind a delicate veil, and her dress sparkled like the morning dew. The crowd gasped, their eyes wide with surprise. "Who is this?" they whispered to each other, filled with wonder. The mysterious maiden gracefully slid down from the horse and began to dance. She moved to the music with such skill and grace that the crowd was left speechless. Her steps were smooth and familiar, like a soft breeze on a hot day. The prince's heart began to beat faster. He watched her closely, feeling something stir deep inside him. This dance, he thought. I know this dance. He peered at her, trying to see beyond the veil. A strange feeling washed over him, and he felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if nature were there, dancing right in front of him. Goosebumps rose on his arms, and his heart pounded harder than ever before. The maiden's dance was like magic, her movements captivating and beautiful, the most enchanting performance anyone had seen in years. The villagers stood in awe, their mouths open in amazement as they watched her glide across the ground with unmatched grace and skill. Finally, as the drums fell silent, the maiden stopped dancing and walked up to the prince. Slowly she lifted her veil. "What?" the prince exclaimed, his voice filled with shock and joy. "Nene!" he screamed. He reached out to hold her hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had not seen this face for so long, and now it was right before him. He didn't care if she was human or a ghost. Nene's face was more beautiful than ever, glowing with a light that seemed to come from within. The prince just stared, unable to speak, his heart overwhelmed with happiness. "Yes, it's me," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. "It's me, Nene." The whole village stood in stunned silence, unsure of what they were seeing. Ngala's eyes widened with terror. She remembered. She had watched Nene drown in the river. How come? Ghost! Ghost! She screamed, turning to run. But before she could take another step, the gods struck her down, stopping her in her tracks. Nene turned to face Ngala, her voice strong and clear. "Let the villagers hear what you did," she commanded. Ngala's face grew pale and tears began to roll down her cheeks. Nene's voice carried so much power that it compelled her to begin to speak immediately. Trembling, she confessed everything. She told the villagers how she and her friends had pushed Nene into the river and watched her drown. She had hoped that Nene would never return to the village again, so she could have the prince all to herself. The crowd gasped, their hands flying in their mouths in disbelief. Tofiakwa they spat in disgust, their faces twisted in anger and shock. They were furious as they looked at Ngala and her friends, who were now crippled on the ground, unable to move. The gods had struck them down with cripple. Nene then began to share her story, telling them how the mermaids had saved her from the river and cared for her during the years she was away. As she spoke, the prince's eyes filled with tears of joy. He had finally been reunited with the one he loved. Okolo, Nene's father, rushed forward and wrapped his arms around his daughter, tears streaming down his face. "I never thought I would see this day again," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Nene looked more beautiful and radiant than ever before, and everyone could see the light of happiness shining in her eyes. The mood in the palace quickly turned from shock to celebration. The drums began to roll again, this time with a joyful rhythm, and the people danced and sang. Overjoyed that Nene had returned, the whole village celebrated together, their hearts filled with happiness and relief. The prince and Nene stood together smiling as the villagers shared. It was a day none of them would ever forget. After the cheers and laughter had settled, the prince could not take his eyes off Nene. He gently took her in his hands, feeling the warmth and comfort he had missed for so long, and led her up to the stage where everyone could see them. His heart bustling with happiness, his eyes sparkled with excitement like the stars on a clear night. He felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his heart, and now, standing beside Nene, he felt whole again. He turned to Nene, his voice strong but gentle. "My life has been a dark night without your light in it," he said, looking deeply into her eyes. "But now that I have you back, I feel the sun shining again. You are my happiness, and I cannot imagine living without you." Then, with a smile that spread across his face, he turned to the crowd and said, "This is the woman of my dreams. She is the one I have chosen." Tears streamed down Ngala's face. Her heart sank with regret and shame. Her legs, once strong and swift, were now crippled, and it dawned on her that she would never walk again. Then, the king's voice boomed across the courtyard. "I will not allow evil to stay in our land," he declared angrily. He ordered that the Kukut family, along with their crippled daughter and her friends, be banished from the village. As they were driven out, children from the village picked up stones, throwing them at Ngala and her family. With each stone that hit her, Ngala felt a sharp sting of pain and sorrow. Her heart ached with regret. She wished more than anything that she could turn back time and make better choices. The shame of being cast out in front of everyone, mocked and humiliated, was worse than the pain of losing the prince. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks, and her heart was filled with deep sadness. She realized that her greed and jealousy had led to this awful moment. Back in the palace, the celebrations continued with joy and music. People danced and sang, celebrating the return of Neche and the prince's happiness. A few weeks later, Prince Obora and Princess Neche were married in a grand ceremony. The whole village turned out to celebrate their union. Mazi Okolo, Neche's father, was overjoyed to see his daughter so happy. The king and queen smiled warmly, knowing that their son had found true love. The villagers too celebrated with all their hearts. Eager for the bright future they believed that their leaders would bring. Prince Obora and Princess Neche began their life together, and their love grew stronger each day. When they became king and queen, they ruled the kingdom with fairness and kindness. Under their leadership, the land prospered and the people were happy and content. Everyone felt lucky to have such good and caring rulers. Once every year, Neche would go back to the river, carrying gifts and offerings. She would kneel by the water's edge, giving thanks to the mermaid who had saved her life and cared for her during those years she was away. She never forgot their kindness, and she always showed her gratitude. And so, Prince Obora and Princess Neche lived happily ever after, their hearts filled with love and their kingdom filled with peace and joy. Hey besties! Thank you for watching this amazing story, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did enjoy making it. I would like you to drop your lessons in the comments section. And don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not done that. Thank you for all your amazing love and support. That means so much to me. Right now, I'll have to go and see you in our next story. Bye!